Good afternoon, everybody. Uh, Hopefully you guys are having a good show. My name is Prakash Nagpal. I'm from Infoblox. As the slide says, I feel compelled to repeat everything that's on the slide. So it's going to be a long afternoon. We'll read every word. Okay, I will try not to. So how many of you know about Infoblox? Okay. And what, do you guys use Infoblox? Who uses Infoblox? Okay, several of you do. And you're supposed to say good things at this point. You're supposed to say Infoblox is great. Wait a minute, I think you can leave the room. Thank you. Thank you for being customers. I'm going to try to stay away from talking purely about Infoblox. Obviously, they pay me, so I have to, at some point, I've got to tell you about who we are. I'm going to talk in general about the way we see the world in terms of the loss of data, the spread of malware, and I've been told to stay close to the mic, so I'm going to try to stay as close as possible. Otherwise, I like to run around the room. So, and talk about what we see in terms of malware, ransomware, what we think is at the root cause, and propose some steps that we've seen customers take, some best practices around preventing the spread of malware and protecting your data. How many of you are concerned about data leakage? What does that mean to you, right? Data leakage, is it more inside? Is it external factors? All the above? Okay. And where do you think is your biggest threat? Is it insiders? Is it external factors? Do you have a sense of what weighs on your mind more? Yes, all the above? Okay. Combination of them? So I'll talk a little bit about, we just completed a survey with SANS to poll our prospects, customers, a broad range of people to understand what is top of their mind. And the answers were, in some regard, like you guys, every question I ask, you guys nod your head, which is, it's broad. And that is one of the challenges with security. The challenges are so broad, and we would all like a silver bullet. As a vendor, I'm also here to tell you, somebody tells you they have a silver bullet that can cure everything, they're lying, including people from Infoblox, right? There is not a silver bullet that'll cure all ills. It is about defense in-depth strategies. It is about understanding what holes you have, what can you plug, and the other aspect that's not as talked about in the industry is how do you cooperate and share information methodically. Any of you participate in some kind of exchange to share threat intelligence, threat data? No? So that's interesting, right? Think about it. All of you worked for the government, in essence, city, state. What an opportunity to share threat intelligence, threat information. And I'll talk a little bit about the efforts that we are undertaking to make that possible, make that easier. In the enterprise space, I will confess to you that a challenge is always disclosure. In the enterprise space, you get hacked and you want to share threat intelligence, people go, well, if I tell you, I've got to call the government and tell them that I got breached. And that's a double-edged sword. Do I want my name out there? But it's also interesting to see that this is happening at the city and the state level. How can we facilitate that threat intelligence sharing? And I'll talk a little bit about that. And Fernando and Ryan are here to keep me honest, where I veer off and talk about things that are really not true. Fernando has been with the company, how long, Fernando? 7 years. Ryan, how long have you been with Infoblox?
4.5.
Okay, so they've both been here much longer than I have, and when I stray, they're going to come kick me and correct me. So, thank you. So, here's another interesting fact. As we were doing this research, and we looked at visibility. How many of you have a visibility challenge? How many of you, actually, I should ask it differently. How many of you know about everything on your network? Every asset? Yeah, I see some people laughing and shaking their heads, right? It's interesting. Why do you think that is, right? It turns out that about 10% of people say we can't see what's on the network, which I think is understated. I think there's a much bigger population, especially when I talk in the commercial sector, right? In private development, I have no idea. Can I run a report that tells me all the devices on my network today, at this point? Maybe. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not. And the other thing is, how do you find that information? It's remarkable. Last year at VMworld in Berlin, one of the guys on my team was out there, and he comes back, he calls me, he says, Prakash, it's 2017. And I cannot believe that companies that have tens of thousands of devices maintain this information on a spreadsheet. And you're all laughing, half because you're laughing at the company, and the other half is because you're doing it, right? I mean, and think about it, 2017, right? We rely on manual processes. It's not meant to be a criticism, it's just a recognition of where we are as an industry. How can you keep up to date with all the assets that are coming on and off your network, the virtual workloads that are coming on and off your network? I was on the phone with some folks from our Asia Pac team yesterday, and they said one of the customers told them, oh yeah, the visibility thing is good, but it's kind of a nice to have. And I'm scratching my head going, what do you mean it's a nice to have? How can you say it's nice to have visibility into my network? And he said, look, don't argue with me. This is what the customer told me. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to pick on you. But it's remarkable to hear that, right? And I see the wide grins on your face going, what are they smoking? I don't know what they smoke in APAC. California I can talk about. No, I'm kidding. The other thing is, there's a recognition of what is happening on the networks. Ransomware, insider threats, denial of service, and the integrity of the network. These are important. How many of you can put your hand up when I say, is the integrity of a network important? Is it okay if it goes down? None of you are going to raise your hand, right? Because everything you do relies on somebody accessing your network. So if the boundary of your network, if that ability to access your network, your DNS server goes down, guess what? Nobody can access your network. And how can you not be concerned about that, right? It's a rhetorical question. Yeah, of course you are. And it shows up that after all these years of DDoS attacks and all of that, it still remains a key consideration. Ransomware, insider threats, DDoS attacks, your DNS infrastructure going down, all play an important part. So for those breached, the question we asked was, what's the leading cause? They talked about malware and insider threats. What do you think all pieces of malware, what's the one of several things that they might have in common? What do you think is that one thing that they all do that's common? Perfect. I should have brought pens. I should throw a pen at this point. So that's right. At some point, they're making a callback to a host. And what's involved in that callback? There's a DNS lookup. It's somewhere they're looking up a malicious domain, IP address, or something. And that's the one thing that majority of pieces of malware have in common when they're calling out. They're connecting to some command and control server either to get instructions, check in, or worse still, bless you, to exfiltrate your data. Right? They're doing that all the time. And what is the primary transport for data exfiltration? Encrypted channels, emails, and DNS were the top three identified by our customers, by the people at SANS surveyed, not our customers. The other factor, I asked this question when I'm around the globe, and I'm going to ask it here before I get into the slide. How many different pieces of security technology are on your network? Less than 5? 5 to 10? Anybody less than 5? 5 to 10? Okay. 10 to 20? 20 to 50? Majority of the people I talk to around the world have 20 to 50 different systems on their network. 20 to 50. Just think about that, right? Now you have 20 to 50 different systems that potentially don't talk to each other, and they're all supposed to be doing security. And again, this shows up. Companies have log data, user monitoring tools, devices, and all of that. That's great you put in so many tools, which is necessary. We're not saying it's not necessary. It's absolutely essential. The question is, do they all talk to each other? From a simple thing like, I found a new device coming onto my network. How often does a vulnerability scanner run? Once a week, once a month, depending on the size of the network? A new device comes on the network, steals data, and leaves in that 1 week period. Would you know? If you can integrate all these devices, you probably would, right? Because now a new device comes on the network, it tells a vulnerability scanner, I know you're going to run the vulnerability scan next week, but run one now on this one device. Obviously, you can't run it on the entire network all the time because you'll be in this continuous loop, right? Your network traffic will all be consumed by running vulnerability scans, and it's not practical. But what if you can do that? What if when you find a device, you send that information to everything else on your network? You discover a new malicious domain, and you share that intelligence across your network. Part of it is the vendors working together. Part of it is approaching the problem a little bit differently. How do you share that? How do you enable that from happen? Enable that. So, what is at the core of these challenges? I beat the horse on visibility, no knowledge of devices, virtual workloads, identifying unmanaged and rogue devices. It's not even knowing when a new device comes in. What about the devices on your network? Even starting with that steady state and finding out what is compliant, what is not with internal policy. Is the configuration up to date of the new firewall that got put in, or the firewall that was there a year ago? Is that up to date or not? How do you know that? How do you keep up to date? You need to know that, right? I mean, nobody is going to argue with me that you don't need to know that. Forget that firewall. So what? It only protects, user social security numbers of everybody in the county. So what, right? None of you are going to say that. Well, hopefully none of you are going to say that. And there's no authoritative view of the network. And the adage at our company is, you can't protect what you can't see. And this is a multi-dimensional problem, right? So taking it down to the space that we know best, DNS, it turns out that your DNS architecture can be used against you. Why? Because it is very open. Firewalls shut down various ports. Anybody have a firewall that shuts down port 53? No, right? You can't shut down DNS. You can't say, well, only 5 people will get access to DNS today. You can't do that. Everybody has to have access to DNS. It remains open all the time. And that's what makes it a favorite channel to exploit. 81% of most common application layer attacks use DNS. It turns out that about 50% of data exfiltration happens through DNS. I made the point earlier about malware using DNS to communicate back, right? Sending that request, and I'll talk a little bit more about other things that malware does to exfiltrate data. And I talked about threat intelligence. Again, going back to DNS, if you know a malicious domain, a malicious URL, a malicious IP address, DNS is the first place where you can make that association. This is malicious. Stop the communication to that. If you can stop the communication to resolve a domain, well, guess what? You can stop any further communication to that domain. So you're eliminating the problem at what we call the DNS control plane. You're starting early. Or what would be the earliest place to start? It goes back to DNS. So we understand defense in depth strategy, right? Again, like I said, it's not about saying you don't need other tools. But it's curious to me when I talk to different organizations, enterprises, governments around the board. You guys all have a firewall and you have a web proxy? Yeah? You have firewall, you also have email proxies. How many of you have firewall and some DNS protection? Few, but not all, right? And DNS is one of the most critical protocols. That's interesting, isn't it? That we look at other layers of protection for email, for web communication, but not for DNS. And DNS is the key to the kingdom, so to speak. It is the mechanism that you use to start all communication. Why is it that we don't protect that? We call that the DNS gap. Right? We look at every other protection that's happening in multiple layers, and again, it goes back to the defense in depth. There is no silver bullet. You can't protect everything at once. It's about building in layers of protection and making sure that these layers talk to each other. By the way, please keep this interactive. I do not like a monologue. I'm sure you do not like a monologue after a full day of listening to monologues. So please ask questions. You disagree with something, please tell me you're wrong. I would love that dialogue. So actually, don't tell me I'm wrong, please. The other challenge we see is this operation in silos, especially not in front of my colleagues. In private, you can come tell me. The other thing is we see is silos. Network data, security data. It's interesting. I was in front of an organization. We were having a conversation about how do you react to a threat. Where do you get your data from? And there's an active threat. You are trying to diagnose that. He says, well, we file a ticket with the network team. Like, really? So you are losing data and you file a ticket, and what is the turnaround time? Oh boy, hours, days sometimes. And I go, well, what do you do in between? Right? And this is a large financial institution, and you're sitting there going, wow, what do I tell them? Right? How do I react to their response? Do I act surprised? Do I go, oh, wow, it happens everywhere, or that's okay? Or what do I say? And you're thinking, oh my God, you manage my money. Can you react faster? Right? But they file a ticket and wait for the network team to get the data to them. It's not about eliminating silos, it's about how do you use technology and process to bridge these silos. There's no more network team, security team, right? It has to come together because the data is all interlinked. There's no network data and security data. So how can we think about these teams differently? How do you bring all this information together and share it seamlessly? Again, I will not quote the pundits. You guys all know. All pundits like to say something about everything, and silos between network, edge, and endpoint data systems and processes can restrict an organization's ability to prevent. And some guy got paid a lot of money to say that. So, and I had to put it in there. Obvious, right? So this is a challenge. The other challenge we see is not only it's about sharing information, data, and intelligence, but about having the context, answering the question of who, what, where, and when. I found a threat. How did it happen? Who did it happen to? What entities were involved? Where in the network was this device? What was impacted? What other communication happened with this element? Where was this element in the network, and when did this happen? You need all that context so that you can resolve. Knowing that there was a threat somewhere in the network that happened at some time in the day is as good as not knowing anything about it, right? Oh, sure, so, bad things happen. I remember there's a sign in Yosemite, I think by Bridal Veil Falls. It says, accidents happen here annually. I want to know which date and time of the year they happen, so I'll just avoid that, right? But having that information is kind of useless. Sure, accidents happen there annually, but when? Give me that context, right? Or the sign could have been better designed and says, be careful, you could slip and fall, right? That would probably be better, but accidents happen here annually does nothing for me. Besides, encourage my kids to go, wow, this must be risky, let me climb up there. So it's the same thing with the security. How do you understand what happened where? How do you build that context around a threat so that you can resolve it? So we've come up with an approach to security that involves three prongs, three elements. And the reason we break it out is multifold. One, I think there's a logical progression. You can't do everything all at once. And we've also found that organizations have evolved to doing different things based on budget, based on maturity in terms of security and so on. And they look at security in terms of, first, let me protect my network. Let me ensure that my services and applications are available and that I can access my network. So let me protect the infrastructure. Let me start by ensuring the integrity, making sure that if an attack happens, my services are still available while I offload this traffic. Let me have a robust enough architecture so that I have the redundancy built in, I have the fault tolerance built in. Let me make sure if I have multiple locations that they have some failover and so on. So they start with building out this robust infrastructure. Then it's about what is in this infrastructure. What do I have in here? I have the assets, I have the data. How do I protect them? How do I lock that down? And as they grow and they invest further, then they go, okay, I've protected the data, I've locked down, I've built the doors and windows, I've locked down my assets, the data within the assets. How do I make, to draw an analogy to the home, as you can tell, I love analogies. It's how do I make the alarm system that's connected to the doors and windows connected to my laptop, also connected to my camera? How do I make all of these work together? So that if somebody, I would love this in my house, somebody tries to break open my door, the lock on my computer goes, to turbo mode and it locks it so that nobody can lift my laptop, right? That would be great to have. How do I send this message from one element to the other? How do I build this unified system across every part of my infrastructure? Does that resonate with you guys? Does that make sense? Do you look at security like this? Yes? Now, what would you deviate from on this progression? Right? Is there anybody that's going to do all of it at once, would do all of it at once? Where would you start? Would you start at the same place I talked about, or would you start at a different place? Please speak up. I've got to get a sip of water. Please, somebody. Help me. Anybody?
There's a lot of, I don't know about recently so much, but, in the last 5 years or so, there's a lot of talk about the perimeterless enterprise and how you have to secure the data, not the device, or, so, there's sort of maybe a reordering in some circles between number one and number two. It's more about making sure the data is protected rather than the equipment. The equipment is commoditized. It's the data that's important.
That's a really good point. So I should dig a little bit deeper into that, right? It's not about protecting the infrastructure in terms of a physical, my appliance is protected. You're right. Maybe the analogy that I used was a little misinformed. It's about making sure that every part of my network is available at every point in time so that I can access everything while my data is protected too. You're absolutely right. This Cisco has spent billions of dollars on talking about the borderless network. There is no boundary, right? Is a virtual machine sitting in an Amazon cloud somewhere part of my network, or is it not? It absolutely is. If you have workloads there, if you're serving up applications and your data is there, it is. But that should still be accessible. It has to be accessible at all times. It has to be available. And if an application is running there, that application has to be available. And that's what I mean by protecting the integrity of the infrastructure, is making sure, regardless of where it resides, and not only that, the infrastructure that you choose or you deploy, these appliances, right? We used to think of them as physical hunk of metal that sit somewhere because somebody likes to walk in my old jobs, we used to talk about people that used to, the hug factor. I come in the morning, there's a server room, I want to go in there and I want to hug that thing because I don't believe in deploying this virtually, I want to see it, right? But that is pretty much dissipated, right? Where there's no hugging. You're back to actually hugging your wife and kids and your spouses, right? It's like, oh my God, what a concept. I can't hug anything at work. But this virtual world of where's my infrastructure, where does it exist, is shattered. This, it's not any one place, it's everywhere. And how do I protect that, make sure it's available? It still has to be accessible at all times. It's a really good point. Anybody else want to point out the flaws in my analogies? Who else? Please. That's good. I'll have to stop. I'll have to find another analogy now. I have homework to do. So what do we mean by visibility, right? What is best practice to get this visibility? It's about managing these diverse devices intelligently as you grow. To the point that you were making, whether it's physical or virtual, you need to know where these elements are in your network. Identifying these unmanaged devices, you have to have the ability to put something in place that can look at your network as it is today and be able to understand what is compliant with your IT policy, what is not. And then notifying tools about non-compliant devices so that you can actually do something. Otherwise, we end back with the sign that says, accidents happen here annually, right? If you're not going to do anything about it, you might as well not know. I was at my previous cybersecurity company. I was at a show in San Diego, and a CISO of a really large company, about $1 billion in revenue, was walking by and we said, what do you think about this concept of giving you visibility everywhere? Here's the problem. You give me visibility, then I know there's a problem. I have to do something about it. And you're thinking, yeah, that's kind of the point. He says, but I'm not quite sure what to do about all these things because these threats are coming in at a pace that I don't know. I can't keep up with. So I'd rather just not know, right? Yes, that's kind of a good perspective to have, but you're noting down, do not do business with company X, right? I will never do business with you. But I mean, that was the perspective, right? 3 to 5 years ago. And I think what has changed is breaches where somebody actually got fired for that. That has changed everything in the way we look at it, right? It's no more, can I protect my job? At the end of the day, we're all human, right? It comes back, there's a human element in everything we do. Well, I hope there's a human element in everything we do. And when this starts happening, people go, no, I do want visibility. Even if I can't do anything about it, at least I know and I can start isolating problems, right? That's a logical approach to doing it, and absolutely critical to have that visibility so that you can then start understanding what is it that you don't have blind spots on so that you can start addressing. And that perspective has definitely changed. I don't hear CISOs saying anymore, I don't want to know. They go, I want to know. And then tell me what I can do about it. So that's the follow-up question that they're asking more and more often. And that goes back to the context I talked about. It goes back to connecting to everything else. Protecting against wide array of threats. Knowing what the wide array of threats are, right? When you're to maintain this integrity of your infrastructure, the DDoS attacks that are happening, you need to protect against a broad range of attacks. Not only do you need protection against a broad range of attacks, that intelligence needs to be updated constantly. Look, we are in the security business, and I can tell you we have a dedicated threat intelligence team that is monitoring all these attacks and updating this information all the time, every day. In fact, when the Equifax breach happened, it turned out that in the first day, our threat intelligence team discovered 53 malicious sites, not even in the first day, in like the first 5 hours, that had sprung up that were collecting user information saying, you went to Equifax to check, I hope, right? Whether you were breached or not.
Actually, no. I've already got bigger problems.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry to hear that. But most people went to check. I went to check. I can tell you, within hours of getting notified, I was there going. And sure enough, they said, you've been compromised. Like, oh, great. I'm one of the 50% of the US population that got compromised. But there were people that put up websites that said, we will help you determine whether you've been compromised. Give me your social security number. And we discovered like 53 such sites in a matter of hours. That threat intelligence, I can almost guarantee that no organization alone can keep up. Do you have dedicated threat intelligence teams that are doing this research? How many of you do? Right? Hardly. I'd be surprised if any of you told me you have dedicated threat intelligence teams that are keeping up with this threat intelligence all the time. I'd be pleasantly surprised, but I would be surprised. Because majority of commercial organizations don't too. So they keep up with this information. Is your threat information current, right? A new type of DDoS attack is being developed and perpetrated. Do you have that signature? Is that available to you? How do you keep up with that? How does your system get updated? And making sure that those updates are not only available to you, but how are they fed into your systems so that your systems are up to date? Because it's, again, it goes back to, I have a file that has a new signature. How do I apply that signature to the system I have? If you don't have that mechanism automated and built out, might as well not have that system. And then enhancing the visibility by sharing this information, having centralized visibility, making sure you're sharing this indicators of compromise, making sure your architecture is robust enough to maintain the integrity of your network and applications and services, even while the attack is happening. You have to consider all of that when you're architecting your security. Disrupting the cybersecurity kill chain. Right? So what happens when, we talked about malware, we talked about the fact that it uses DNS to communicate out. What if you were able to disrupt that communication? I talked about having the most current threat intelligence. That's one piece of the equation. What if you then make your infrastructure reliant on that threat intelligence to stop communication to all of the malicious destinations immediately? You find out, you take action on that, you block. Right? That's about disrupting the cybersecurity kill chain. Then it's about you understanding how DNS is being used. It's one thing, how is DNS used to exfiltrate data? DNS queries are, who here has witnessed that, can explain that? DNS used in data exfiltration, how DNS queries are used? Anybody want to take a shot? Go ahead.
You put the information in the DNS query and you send it to a particular DNS server, or basically, or you register a DNS server that's going to answer that information.
Yeah. And DNS does not depend on the answer coming back, right? If the answer doesn't come back, it sends another request. And to these malicious servers, you're sending request after request after request, and your data is going out. Doesn't seem abnormal. To the firewall, it says, okay, great, yep. Keep sending out DNS queries. Yep, another DNS query, good. Awesome, send out more, right? So you're using these DNS tunnels, you're sending out DNS queries to exfiltrate data. And there are some pieces of malware that have a regular pattern. So one, you can recognize the malicious domains. Second, you can recognize patterns and say, every third byte in the DNS query is a certain thing. And there are others that are changing. Malware patterns are changing. They're constantly updating mechanisms that they use. So you should be able to look at all of that. And obviously, it goes back to this visibility theme, right? I'm going to beat that dead horse because I think visibility is one of the most critical things we hear about. How do I get visibility into my network? Because that's where it all starts. And distributing this threat intelligence. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the threat intelligence has to be timely. It has to be consumable. Make sure it's consumable and easy to deploy. It's not good enough to get the threat intelligence that you cannot use and apply. And that's what we mean by operationalizing threat intelligence data. Not only that, it's one thing to have the threat intelligence, it's another thing to have these indicators of compromise that you can then share. I found a new device coming into my network. Do my security tools have the APIs to then convey that information to some other system or subsystem that can make that useful, can take some action? A network access control system that says, you're quarantined. You can only access the guest network until I can figure out who you are or what you are. So you sit in the corner, right? Like giving your kids a timeout. Go sit in the corner. Well, my wife gives me a timeout, so maybe it's like even adults getting timeouts. Go sit in the corner, and until you can figure out, how to behave better, right? And then making sure you can share this information across your network, whether it's a SIM, whether it's a threat intelligence platform, a vulnerability scanner, whether it's a network access control subsystem, and so on. Next-gen firewall, whatever it might be. So what are like 2 or 3 things that are key to, I talked about this broad architecture or host of solutions. What are some of the key things to look for? I talked about, and there are several vendors that do everything we talked about so far, right? But what are other questions you can ask? I talked about these variations of threats. Reputation, signatures, and behaviors. What do I mean by reputation? Reputation is known bad. It's on a list, malicious domain, malicious URL, don't access it, great. That's a start. Then you look at behavior, look at signatures. Signatures is a known pattern of information exchange with a certain domain. That's an indicator that that exchange is bad. So signatures, and as you know more about them, you can keep adding to those signatures. The third is because malware, ransomware is evolving continuously, behavior. How do those signatures change and evolve? Am I keeping track of that? And that takes a lot of data analysis. It takes, again, sorry to use a couple of buzzwords, but it takes machine learning. It takes analyzing loads and loads of data to be able to understand what behavior is good and what's bad, and being able to tell you, or I shouldn't say good or bad, good and suspicious, or known good and suspicious, right? Because suspicious does not always mean bad, but at least being able to classify that and give it some kind of threat rating and say, this you should look into some more. Make sure you have a combination of all three. Right? It's not one is not enough. You have to have all three, because the perpetrators of these malware and the people that are the bad actors are using all three methods. They know you have reputation, so they're using a combination of all three. And God knows they're cooperating with each other. Right? You can buy. I was reading this morning. You can buy now malware for $39 on the dark web. The records that were stolen from Equifax are on sale for between $5 and $25 on the dark web. Just know my life is on sale there for 25 bucks. I know my worth now. It's 25 bucks. Somebody can buy every place I've ever lived at, every credit card number, every account number, and everything about me. It's out there. It's interesting, when I was talking to an analyst a few years ago, he said, look, you can go to the dark web and you can specify, I want a credit card that was lost in Austin or is based out of Austin, has a credit limit of $35,000 and is an Amex card. You can be that specific. It's like ordering pants. I want a certain size, and you can buy a credit card. I've been in the security industry now for several years. That still is mind-boggling to me. Like, they're so sophisticated, right? And they are sharing this intelligence. Why is it that we cannot share this intelligence better? So understand how there's a platform. Obviously this is where my 2 cents for Infoblox. We built a platform that allows the sharing of threat intelligence, consolidating threat intelligence from a variety of sources, including DHS and all of that, and making that available in standardized formats to every part of the security infrastructure. Ask your vendors if they support that, or they have a platform that enables that, because that is important. And being able to investigate that context, once you know a malicious domain, malicious URL, what other domains were registered? It's the flavor of the day to pick on Russians, so I'm going to pick on that. Russian hacker has a malicious domain that you discovered. What other domains are registered to that same person or that same entity? It's important to know, because it's very likely that that person has, all the domains registered to that person are malicious. Or a new domain was generated 5 minutes ago. Is that suspicious? Should you allow access to that or not? You want to know that, right? And you can have different policies within your organization, whether you want to allow access to that or not. What we find our customers saying is, it's not that critical for us to get access to a new company that was formed 5 minutes ago. We can wait. It's okay. And what the threat intelligence teams do is, once they're a certain age, they fall off from that suspicious list. Make sure you have access to all of that. Thank you. And then make sure your architecture is robust, scalable, and can support not only your deployment methodologies of your workloads being in the cloud or being physical, but the devices themselves being deployable, physical or virtually. Make sure your vendors are able to meet all of these needs. So, right on cue. Thank you, Fernando. I paid him a buck for that. So, I'll stop and open it up to questions, comments. I baffled everybody. Oh, they don't believe a word of what I said. Sorry, Ryan. I tried, man.
You can do all this on-prem, or you can do it in the cloud. And I'm not sure which governor city agency that Fernando and I are the ones that show up and talk about all this. Qua, who's a big Infoblox customer. Anybody else an Infoblox customer in here? What do you do?
Sorry, storage.
Oh, no, that's right. Netamron.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a policy compliance tool, which wasn't discussed in here a little bit as well. You've been a big fan of that. You've had that for a long time, right?
And that's the configuration, monitoring, and all that I talked about, right?
I mean, visibility section is kind of like, okay, when was Fernando? When did he come into the office? When did he almost give you that information down to like the second? Came in the office because he powered up his laptop, desktop, and by the way, he was connected to this port all the way down. And then what did he do on there? Did he do anything from a DNS perspective? A lot lot of the tunnels that he's talking about for behavioral will go into universities or will go into even the government agencies, and I can take a snapshot of your data and you say, here are the 5 different tunnels that you have already created inside of your infrastructure that are going to your Microsoft environment. And people will ask me, oh, what is that, Ryan? What is that? I'm like, well, I know what that is. I know what that, I have no idea what that tunnel is. And so we've been working with some universities, University of San Francisco, found the Wall Street Journal tunnel down their advertisements through DNS onto the page so they can circumvent any web cache proxy that they have in place. And there's some of them we just don't know, where our threat intelligence center is constantly working with other universities to figure out what these DNS tunnels are. And so we'll place them into a list inside of Infoblox and go, hey, that's Spotify. You want to allow Spotify to stream music back and forth across your DNS server. That's Sophos. You have that tool on the inside. I can go on and on, but if you guys want a more custom or more detailed look into your network about some of this stuff, we can
Several banking apps that you use DNS tunnels because it's very open. They're legitimate apps. How do you tell the difference between a legitimate app and one that's trying to steal data? You have to have the ability to discern that.
I find it amazing that security companies are really good at doing DNS tunneling. They like to get their updates to DNS. You're a security company. You're supposed to protect your customer, and you're using a known open port because you know it's going to be open. Why aren't you telling your customers that, right? So it's kind of an interesting thought process. It really is, all happens all the time. So, and that the real key is, to talk a little bit about sharing the data and being able to automatically share the data, whichever applications you use. The ability to share that data, and whenever you're looking at something, can you share it between your applications? Because these silos of information are no longer acceptable. Even within the same application, sometimes you have silos of information. Microsoft has, their DNS and DHCP has silos of information that's incredibly valuable. I don't know who's had to go through a Microsoft log file, Is that fun? We had another university that was looking at our reporting. They had it, and they were asking how to find us, but it looked like their director had come in at 2 in the morning and logged on. Well, it probably wasn't the director. So, we were able to trace down exactly the MAC address that was logging on that IP. So, those are the kind of things that can be really valuable additional tools. And, anything that we collect, we share, and anything that we can ingest, we do. And that's, I think whenever you look at a solution for this, that's a critical piece of the whole puzzle.
Can you consume IOC via sticks and taxis?
Yes. Inside. Sticks and taxi transfer. Taxi, I'm not sure. Things right here. There we go. There you go, sticks. Yeah, so we take all of this. What do you guys have? So you can pick and choose whatever threat intelligence you want. You have the Infoblox threat intelligence. You guys get that today. Today, that gets placed into your Infoblox appliances. But you can take Serval's data if you wanted to. You can take CrowdStrike's data. You can take anyone's data that's out there and that's available, open source data. You can point it to us. This is called Tide. So you'll find this acronym without the T out there in the industry. Information data exchange with a T in front of it is like Tide. Threat intelligence data exchange. Kind of funny. Some people hate it, some people like it. But that curates all the data and says, hey, there's all this overlap here, or hey, this is aged out, we're gonna age out this data, etc. So we keep it real clean and crisp. So you had something up there that said it's a 0.01% false positive rating. And so that's what Tide does. It cleans everything up, makes sure you're not hunting down false positives all the time. Marketplace, so for instance, if you have any association with the Department of Homeland Security, so I'm not sure, did anybody get that?
AIS.
Yeah, MSI SAC is one, but there's another one. That
AIS, AIS. AIS.
Yeah, what's that stand for?
Oh,
No.
God.
Does anybody get the IAS data?
From,
You guys, you can have the ability to go into Infoblox now, and so that's telling you there's IAS data. So they released something 2 weeks ago that said, here's North Korea's botnet that they've been utilizing. That's already sitting inside our Infoblox product, and we're all ready to stream down long before they ever even announced that. So it's a way to curate data. You don't like our data? Hey, turn it off. Go get somebody else's, but we'll still allow you to do everything you want to do through our platform, manage it through our platform, and bring it in. And then what this is about is we'll deliver it in any format you want. Let's just say, hey, you know what, I'm a diehard Microsoft fan, I don't control any of that stuff, I'm gonna keep all my DNS on Microsoft. We don't care, you can still buy threat intelligence, use Tide, and put it in the Palo Alto firewall if you want. You can put it in Blue Coat, you can put it in whatever data is consumable in these formats here.
AIS is automated indicator sharing from DHS.
So we put the A. So
Yeah.
anyway, I saw the feed in the inside, it actually shows that. And that's free to a lot of you government agencies as well, through the Department of Homeland Security. And then it's not outside, if there's any vendors that you already have outside that you want to know who you integrate with. If you go back to the ecosystem slide, we release like 9 to 12 of these a year, these guys. I can tell you right now, Tenable was out there in the booth. We just haven't updated the slide yet because we did Qualys first, rapid stuff, and we do Tenable integration as well. So every time a new IP comes onto the network, or anytime the network team configures a new network, it auto tells the vulnerability scanner so it can stay 100% up to date. So you eliminate this manual process of, hey, server team, I just created this new network because I have all that time to just tell you everything I do at work every piece of the day. And then for NAC, network access control, Forescout is out there. We do Forescout integration as well. Is ServiceNow on there?
ServiceNow is not on here.
Yeah, so
From,
there's almost any app we can integrate with, but we've already pre-canned and pre-built so many different integrations. I actually recommend that you just type in Infoblox and X vendor, and it typically takes you to their site and says, you know, because we don't spend a lot of money on Google, getting to the top of the Google search space. Most of our competitors do, or not competitors, our integrators do. If there's anyone you want to know, we pre-canned the integration with.
so there's a lot more partners than are on the slide. Putting them on the slide requires marketing and legal to all sign off, right? So marketing guys are great. Legal guys, no, I'm kidding. But no, most seriously, there's like 80 partners that we have. I don't know if any of you go to the Infoblox community site, community.infoblox.com. Great source of information. There's the ones that we partner with have their own channel. Even though we don't have the ability to put their logo on a slide, they're listed there.
We've been sticking everything on YouTube too, so we can say, give me a video of how to configure this, and you get Prakash's marketing video, here's what it does.
Oh, sorry.
Under 3 minutes, and then you get, here's the 45-minute, every single checkbox, and go through how to configure this configuration.
Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming.